Under the scorching sun of Thebes, Pharaoh Achenemon strides through the palace gardens, unaware that he is about to face a ghost from his past. Then he sees her, just a simple gardener, dust from her work on her hands, her gaze lowered. She shouldn't catch his attention, yet something gives her away, something impossible. A pendant gleams on her chest, swaying in the breeze like a whisper of fate. The same pendant he once held in his hands, the same one that vanished along with someone who should never have been forgotten. The air grows heavy. His heart pounds with fury. How does she have it? Who is she, truly? What begins as a coincidence turns into an obsession, a crack in history that consumes him, threatening to shatter everything he believed to be true about his kingdom and himself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal gardens as Pharaoh Achenemon strolled alone among the lotus blossoms and papyrus reeds. These rare moments of solitude provided brief respite from the constant demands of rule. At 32, after nearly a decade on the throne, the burden of leadership weighed heavily on his broad shoulders. Rounding a cluster of date palms, he noticed a slender figure kneeling beside a reflecting pool, arranging flowers in a clay basin. She hadn't noticed him, a rare occurrence in his life where every movement was observed and announced. As she leaned forward, something glinted in the sunlight, a pendant that had fallen forward from beneath her simple white garment. Achenemon's breath caught. The distinctive shape of the golden amulet was unmistakable, even from a distance. The woman sensed his presence and looked up, eyes widening in shock. She scrambled to her feet, knocking over her basket in her haste to prostrate herself. "Forgive me, Great One. I did not see you approach." Achenemon barely registered her words, his attention fixed on the pendant now visible against her throat. A golden scarab beetle with wings outstretched, clasping a lapis lazuli ankh. "Rise," he commanded sharply. "Your name?" "Nefret, Divine One. I tend the eastern gardens. Look at me." When she lifted her gaze, Achenemon found himself staring into eyes the color of the Nile during inundation, a deep, mysterious green-brown that stirred long-buried memories. "That pendant," he said, gesturing toward the amulet. "Where did you acquire it?" Her hand moved instinctively to cover the jewelry. "It is a family keepsake, Great One. I've had it since childhood." "From which family do you descend, Nefret the gardener?" She hesitated. "My parents were simple people. My father served in the temple of Karnak. He is with Osiris now." "And this pendant came to you through him?" "Yes, Great One," she replied too quickly, her gaze flickering momentarily away. The amulet was no ordinary trinket, but a royal commission, one of a matched pair. One had belonged to him, the other. "You will attend me this evening after the evening meal. Present yourself to the palace steward. Bring the pendant. Speak of this encounter to no one." The pharaoh's private chamber was surprisingly modest. Simple furnishings of the finest craftsmanship filled the space, with numerous papyrus scrolls neatly arranged on shelves. A balcony opened to the night sky, where stars glittered against the darkness. Nefret stood nervously inside the room, clutching the scarab pendant that had caused this upheaval in her orderly life. She had been bathed and dressed in a simple but fine linen gown by palace servants, her eyes lined with kohl, her lips tinted with subtle red pigment. "Do you know why you are here?" Achenemon asked, turning from the balcony. "You wished to see my pendant, Divine One." "Yes, I wish to know how a garden tender came to possess a royal amulet crafted for a noble lady who disappeared 15 years ago." Nefret's throat went dry. "Divine One, I told you the truth. It was given to me by my father, your father who conveniently served at Karnak and is now with Osiris," Achenemon interrupted. "A story I might believe had this been any ordinary trinket, but this was created by the royal jeweler Senenmut, who crafted only 2 such pieces in his lifetime." He reached out. "May I?" With reluctance, Nefret lifted the cord from around her neck and placed the amulet in his outstretched palm. Achenemon examined it closely, turning it over to reveal an inscription on the back. "Two souls, one path, eternal as Ra's journey," he read aloud, the same words inscribed on its twin. From within his robes he withdrew a small golden box and opened it to reveal an identical pendant. "This one was mine," he said quietly. "The other belonged to Meritaten, daughter of the noble house of A. We exchanged them as children, a promise between us before politics and duty separated our paths." She was traveling to the summer palace when bandits attacked her caravan. No survivors were found. He looked up from the pendants to Nefret's face, studying her features with new intensity. Until today, I believed this pendant was buried in the western desert with her remains. Now I find it around the neck of a garden tender who bears a striking resemblance to the house of A, Divine One, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What I tell you now must remain between us. Lives depend upon it. You have my word as Pharaoh. Speak freely. Meritaten did not die in that bandit attack, she said. She escaped, the sole survivor, but was badly wounded. A farmer found her and brought her to his home. When she recovered, news had already spread of the caravan's destruction, but she had heard the bandits speaking. They had been hired to ensure she never reached the summer palace, hired by someone within the royal court. Who? Akenemon's face darkened with anger. She never learned the name, but she understood the danger. If she revealed herself, the assassins would return. So she remained dead, taking the name Satya, marrying the farmer's son who had helped save her. And you? Akenemon asked, his voice tight with emotion. Nefret met his gaze directly for the first time. Meritaten was my mother, Divine One. I am her daughter. Meritaten lives? He asked, voice uncertain. No, Divine One. She joined Osiris 3 seasons ago. A fever took her after the floods. Something like pain flashed across the pharaoh's face. And your father, the farmer's son, he died when I was still a child. Raiders attacked our village. So you came to Thebes to find work, Nefret confirmed. Before she died, Mother gave me the pendant and told me the truth of my heritage. She made me promise never to reveal it. Yet here you stand before me, breaking that promise. Because you recognized the pendant. Because you gave me no choice. They looked out over the sleeping city, the moon casting a silver path across the great river. I mourned her deeply, he said finally. Not as a pharaoh mourns a political alliance, but as a boy mourns his first love. When she was reported dead, something in me died with her. She spoke of you often, Nefret offered softly. She kept your memory alive in her heart. And now I find her daughter tending my gardens, Akenemon mused. The gods work in mysterious ways. He turned to face her fully. I must know everything. There is a conspiracy here that has remained hidden for too long. I will tell you all I know, Divine One. But what happens then? My mother feared for my safety should the truth ever emerge. I am no longer a powerless boy, but Pharaoh of Egypt. Those who plotted against Meritaten will answer for their crimes, and her daughter will take her rightful place at court. A sharp knock interrupted them. Enter, Akenemon commanded. The door opened to reveal Imhotep, the high priest, his expression grave. Forgive the interruption, Divine One, but Lady Ankhesenra has learned of your private audience with a garden tender. She is most distressed and threatens to inform her father, the vizier. The affairs of the pharaoh are not subject to the approval of his future wife. Of course, yet perhaps discretion would be wise. Lady Ankhesenra is already on her way to your chambers. Very well. Nefret must not be discovered here. He turned to her. We will continue our conversation soon. For now you must return to your quarters without being seen. Imhotep indicated an elaborate wall hanging. There is a servant's passage behind the tapestry. It leads to the kitchens. Akenemon placed her pendant back in her hands, closing her fingers around it gently. Keep this hidden as your mother taught you. Its secret is not yet ready to be revealed. Just as Nefret slipped into the hidden passage, she heard the outer door bang open, and a woman's voice, sharp with indignation, cut through the air. Husband-to-be, what is the meaning of this? I hear you've been entertaining a common garden girl in your private chambers. As she hurried through the dark passage, Nefret's mind whirled with possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. For the first time, she allowed herself to contemplate a future beyond the garden walls, a future tied to her true heritage and perhaps to the pharaoh who had once exchanged pendants with her mother, a future that Lady Ankhesenra would do anything to prevent. Sleep eluded Akenemon that night. He paced his chamber, the twin pendants lying side by side on his writing table. The revelation that Meritaten had survived, only to live in hiding, bear a child, and eventually die far from her rightful place, left him reeling with conflicting emotions. As dawn broke, the pharaoh summoned Imhotep before the morning rituals. You seem troubled, Divine One, the high priest observed. Did you find answers about the pendant? I found far more than answers, Akenemon replied, swearing his old friend to secrecy before revealing everything. Nefret's identity, the plot against Meritaten, the years she spent hiding under another name. Imhotep's weathered face grew grave. This casts the past in a troubling light. If someone within the royal court arranged the attack, then they've held power unchallenged for 15 years, Akenemon finished. Perhaps they still do. Have you considered who might have benefited from Meritaten's removal? The pharaoh's expression darkened. The list is unfortunately long. My father's court was a nest of vipers, each noble house vying for advantage through marriage alliances, including the house of Nachtmin, father of Lady Ankhesenra, Imhotep noted delicately. Yes, the betrothal to Ankhesenra was arranged within months of the reported attack. A coincidence, perhaps. Perhaps. But I've never believed in convenient coincidences. The pharaoh closed his fist around the pendant. I need you to make discreet inquiries, find anyone still living who was connected to that caravan. After 15 years, witnesses may be difficult to locate, Imhotep cautioned. Then we must be thorough and careful. If those responsible learn of Nefret's existence, they might strike again, Imhotep concluded solemnly. One more thing, Akhenaton added. I want Nefret moved from the servants' quarters. Find a place for her among the noble ladies, as an attendant to my mother's sister. Say she is a distant relation from the Delta region. You intend to keep her close. For her protection, the pharaoh stated firmly, though a flicker in his eyes suggested more complex motivations, and to learn what else she might remember of her mother's account. And what of Lady Ankhesenra? She was most displeased last night. Akhenaton's jaw tightened. I will speak with her myself. Her father's support remains crucial to maintaining peace in the northern provinces. A diplomatic approach would be wise, Imhotep agreed. The vizier controls too many resources to risk alienating him before we know the full truth. After Imhotep departed, Akhenaton watched the sunrise, his gaze drifting toward the eastern gardens where Nefret might be tending her flowers, unaware that her life was about to change dramatically. I will uncover the truth, he vowed softly, for both our sakes. Nefret knelt in the soft earth, carefully transplanting delicate shoots of blue lotus. Her hands worked with practiced precision, but her mind remained fixed on the previous night's extraordinary events. The pharaoh knew her secret, a secret her mother had guarded with her life. Part of her wished she had never caught his eye, that the pendant had remained hidden, yet another part felt strangely liberated. The burden of concealment had been lifted. You seem distracted today, Nefret. She looked up to find Sesen, the head gardener, watching her with curious eyes. Forgive me, Nefret replied. I slept poorly. So I heard. The servants' quarters buzz with talk of how you were summoned to the palace last night, taken to the women's chambers, bathed and dressed like a noble lady. Nefret kept her face carefully neutral. A misunderstanding. The steward confused me with someone else. Did he? Sesen sounded skeptical. Strange that this someone else would be returned to the servants' quarters at midnight, emerging from a passage usually reserved for the palace elite. You've been listening to gossip, Nefret said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Indeed, and the latest gossip says the divine pharaoh quarreled with Lady Ankhesenra last night over a garden girl. Before Nefret could respond, a shadow fell across them. They looked up to find two palace guards standing at attention, with Imhotep behind them. Garden tender Nefret, Imhotep announced formally. You are summoned to the royal palace. Sesen's eyes widened with naked curiosity. Rising slowly, Nefret brushed the dirt from her hands. May I know the purpose of this summons, Holy One? All will be explained in due course, Imhotep replied, his expression revealing nothing. Once inside the palace proper, Imhotep dismissed the guards and led Nefret through corridors reserved for the nobility. They eventually reached a spacious chamber overlooking an interior courtyard garden. These will be your new quarters, Imhotep informed her. Nefret stared in disbelief at the elegant furnishings. There must be some mistake, Holy One. I am a garden tender, not... You are Nefret, distant relation to the royal family from the Delta region, Imhotep interrupted firmly. So you have come to serve as an attendant to the pharaoh's aunt, the Lady T. That is your new identity within these walls, by order of divine pharaoh himself, who believes this arrangement will be safer for all concerned. Your former life as a garden tender is now concluded. Nefret sank onto a nearby chair, overwhelmed. This is happening too quickly. I know nothing of serving a noble lady. You will be instructed in court etiquette, Imhotep assured her. Lady Tia is aware of the necessity for discretion, though not the full details of your situation. The pharaoh told you who I am, Nefret realized. He has confided in me. We are investigating the attack on your mother's caravan, discreetly for now. Imhotep's expression softened slightly. Child, you must understand the delicate position in which you find yourself. If those who arranged your mother's supposed death learn of your existence, My life would be in danger, Nefret finished quietly, just as my mother always feared. Precisely, which is why maintaining this new identity is crucial. After the high priest departed, Nefret moved to the window overlooking the courtyard garden. From this height, she could see the eastern gardens where she had worked that morning. Her former life seemed suddenly distant. She thought of her mother, beautiful, gentle Meritaten, who had lived as simple Satya for so many years, who had chosen a farmer's life over the risk of reclaiming her noble heritage, who had warned Nefret repeatedly never to reveal the truth of her birth. "What would you have me do now, mother?" she whispered. "The choice has been taken from my hands." As if in answer, a warm breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of lotus blossoms from below. Nefret remembered her mother's words. "Our blood carries responsibility, little one. Even in hiding, even in silence, we are daughters of Egypt's oldest noble houses. Never forget that the gods have a purpose for every life, even those lived in shadow." Perhaps this was the purpose the gods had intended, not merely survival in obscurity, but a return to the world that should have been her birthright, a chance to uncover the truth that had forced her mother into hiding. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young servant girl appeared, carrying fine linen clothing. "For you, my lady. Lady Tyre requests your presence for the midday meal once you have changed." "My lady." The address felt strange to her ears after years of being girl or simply Nefret. As she changed into the simple but elegant dress provided, Nefret couldn't help noticing another significant difference in her new position. The servant girl had kept her eyes downcast, had bowed as one does to social superiors. Just hours ago, Nefret herself had been the one bowing, addressing others as "my lady." The speed of the transformation left her dizzy. How easily the world shifted around her, all because the pharaoh had recognized a pendant. All because he had known her mother, had mourned her, had perhaps even loved her. As Nefret fastened her mother's pendant around her neck, no longer hidden beneath her clothes but displayed as a proper noble lady might wear it, she wondered what dangers lurked behind the luxury of her new quarters, what enemies might be watching from the shadows, unaware that their old secret had finally begun to unravel. The mystery that had shaped her entire existence was resurfacing after 15 years of careful burial. Like a body improperly prepared for the afterlife, it refused to remain at rest, rising now to demand proper recognition, proper justice. And Nefret, daughter of Meritaten, found herself at the center of its awakening. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind for Nefret, as Lady Ty, the pharaoh's stern but patient aunt, schooled her in court etiquette. During this time, she caught only fleeting glimpses of Akhenaton, though she often felt his gaze upon her during formal gatherings. "He must be cautious," Lady Ty remarked one evening, noticing Nefret's gaze following the pharaoh. "Tongues already wag about your sudden appearance at court." Now, on the evening of the great festival celebrating the pharaoh's birth, the palace hummed with activity. Nobles from throughout Egypt filled the great hall, which had been transformed with hundreds of oil lamps, garlands of lotus blossoms, and palm fronds. "Tonight, you must remain especially vigilant," Lady Ty instructed as Nefret helped her dress. "With so many visiting nobles present, there will be curious eyes and probing questions. Remember your story. Speak little and observe much." "And that pendant," she added, eyeing the golden scarab at Nefret's throat. "Perhaps it would be wiser to leave it in your chambers tonight. Distinctive jewelry draws attention. Attention invites questions." Reluctantly, Nefret removed the pendant, placing it carefully in a small carved box beside her bed. As Lady Ty exchanged pleasantries with a nobleman, Nefret noticed a woman watching her from across the hall, a striking beauty adorned in finest linen with gold thread, wearing a magnificent headdress of lapis lazuli. When she realized Nefret had noticed her scrutiny, her painted lips curved into a cold smile before she glided toward them. "Lady Tia," she called, her voice melodious yet brittle. "How delightful to see you well. Lady Ankhesenra, I trust you are enjoying the festivities." Ankhesenra's attention remained fixed on Nefret. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your new attendant. She seems to have appeared quite suddenly at court. This is Nefret, a distant relation from the Delta region." "How fortunate for her," Ankhesenra murmured, studying Nefret intensely. "There is something strangely familiar about her features, particularly around the eyes. They remind me of—" She paused deliberately. "Well, it hardly matters. The past is the past, is it not?" After Ankhesenra departed to join the newly arrived pharaoh, Lady Ty gripped Nefret's arm. "Beware that one, she sees too much. If she suspects your true identity, do you believe she recognized something in me? I cannot say, but her reference to your eyes was no idle observation. Your mother had the same distinctive gaze, unusual in its color, impossible to forget for those who knew her well. Later, as Nefret fetched wine for Lady T, a hand caught her elbow. She turned to find a young nobleman with wine-flushed cheeks. "You're the mysterious relation from the Delta," he slurred slightly. "I'm Sebni, son of Nachtmin." The name sent a jolt through Nefret. Nachtmin, father of Ankesenra, the powerful vizier, whose family had benefited most from Meritaten's death. "My sister mentioned you earlier, said there was something familiar about you. I cannot imagine why. I've lived my entire life in the Delta until recently. Strange that no one seems to know which family you belong to, or why Lady T suddenly required an attendant after decades of managing with her usual servants." Before Nefret could respond, a commanding voice interrupted. "I believe Lady Tia is looking for her attendant, Lord Sebni." Imhotep stood nearby, his expression severe. After Sebni departed, the high priest instructed Nefret, "When the pharaoh calls for the midnight blessing dance, position yourself at the eastern entrance to the hall." At midnight, the blessing dance began. 12 priestesses of Hathor moved in intricate patterns around the seated pharaoh. After the chief priestess anointed his forehead, Akhenaton unexpectedly rose from his throne. "On this night, I wish to honor those who have served Egypt faithfully," he announced, distributing gifts to various officials. "And finally, I wish to recognize one whose service has been brief but exemplary." Nefret of the Delta region approached the throne. On unsteady legs, Nefret moved through the parting crowd, feeling Ankesenra's hostile gaze. She performed the court bow perfectly, as Lady Tai had taught her. "For your diligent service to my family," Akhenaton announced, "I present you with this token of royal favor, a delicate golden bracelet fashioned like a papyrus reed." As he fastened it on her wrist, he murmured so only she could hear, "The Eastern Garden, before dawn. Come alone. Imhotep has news." As Nefret retreated, she caught sight of Ankesenra's face, watching her with naked hostility. Whatever suspicions the pharaoh's betrothed had harbored before, his public recognition of a mere attendant had confirmed them. An invisible line had been crossed, a subtle battle had been joined. The eastern gardens lay hushed in pre-dawn stillness, dew glistening on lotus petals, as Nefret made her way along familiar paths. Though she now wore the finer linen of a lady's attendant, her hands still remembered these plants, which once thirsted, which thrived on neglect, which needed support to grow straight and tall. In many ways, she missed this simple work, its certainties and quiet rewards. She found Akhenaton and Imhotep waiting near the reflecting pool, where the pharaoh had first noticed her pendant. Both men were dressed simply, without the trappings of their stations. Had she not known their identities, she might have mistaken them for ordinary nobles. "You came," Akhenaton said, relief evident in his voice. "Were you followed?" "I don't believe so, Divine One. The palace still sleeps after the festivities." "Good. We cannot be too careful." He gestured toward a stone bench. "Please sit. Imhotep has uncovered information about your mother's caravan." The high priest's weathered face was grave in the soft pre-dawn light. "After weeks of discreet inquiries, I located a former guard, Amenemhat, who was assigned to your mother's escort but fell ill the day before departure. His testimony is most illuminating." "What did he say?" Nefret asked, heart quickening. "The official records claim bandits attacked the caravan, but Amenemhat revealed that just before his illness, he overheard the captain of the guard receiving unusual instructions from a royal official to lead the caravan through Scorpion Pass rather than the usual northern route." "Scorpion Pass is notorious for ambushes," Akhenaton interjected. "No royal caravan would normally travel that way." Imhotep nodded. "Exactly. Furthermore, Amenemhat says this change was ordered in secret, with no explanation given. The official who delivered these instructions wore the seal of the vizier's office." "Nachtmin," Nefret whispered, remembering Sebni's threatening manner at the festival. "We cannot yet prove it was Nachtmin himself," Imhotep cautioned, "but certainly someone within his authority." "What else did this guard reveal?" Akhenaton asked. "Most disturbing is what happened after the attack was reported. When Amenemhat recovered and learned of the tragedy, he raised questions about the unusual route. The very next day he was transferred to a distant garrison on the Nubian frontier, a clear message to remain silent." Akhenaton's expression darkened. So the conspiracy reaches deeper than we thought. Not just the attack itself, but a subsequent cover-up. Precisely, Imhotep confirmed, and with Nachtmin's daughter poised to become great royal wife, their position would be secured permanently. The implications hung heavily in the morning air. Nefret thought of Ankhesenra's calculating gaze at the festival, the barely concealed hostility when Akhenemon had honored her publicly. "She suspects who I am," Nefret said. "Ankhesenra, something in my features reminded her of my mother." "That is why we must move carefully," Akhenemon replied. "If Nachtmin learns your identity before we have proof of his involvement, you would be in grave danger." "What proof could possibly exist after 15 years?" Nefret asked. Imhotep exchanged a significant look with the pharaoh. Amenemhat mentioned a sealed document he glimpsed in the captain's quarters, written orders for the route change. If that document still exists, then we would have evidence of the conspiracy, Akhenemon finished. Imhotep believes these orders may have been preserved in the military archives at Karnak. "I have arranged for their discreet examination," the high priest added. "But such a search takes time, especially when conducted without arousing suspicion." As they spoke, the eastern sky lightened, pink fingers of dawn stretching across the horizon. Soon the palace would awaken, servants beginning their daily routines, nobles rising for morning audiences. "We must return before our absence is noticed," Akhenemon said, rising from the bench. "Nefret, continue as you have been, learn from Lady Tie, maintain your identity as her attendant. But be especially wary of Ankhesenra and her brother. Avoid being alone with either of them." "Yes, Divine One." As they prepared to part ways, taking different paths back to the palace, Akhenemon paused. "The bracelet I gave you last night. Wear it always. It marks you as under royal protection. Even Nachtmin would hesitate to move against someone who carries such a visible sign of Pharaoh's favor." Nefret touched the golden papyrus reed, circling her wrist. "Thank you. For this, and for seeking justice for my mother." Something flickered in Akhenemon's eyes, a warmth that went beyond the political intrigue surrounding them. Meritaten deserved far better than she received, as do you. Later that morning, Nefret accompanied Lady Tai to the Temple of Hathor for offerings following the festival. They carried lotus flowers and small figurines to place before the goddess's shrine, along with jugs of sweet wine. "Pharaoh honored you greatly last night," Lady Tai remarked, as their litter made its way through the city streets. "A public gift is no small matter." "I fear it may have intensified Lady Ankhesenra's suspicions," Nefret replied. "Undoubtedly, but it also placed you firmly under royal protection." The older woman's shrewd eyes noted the golden bracelet. "I see you wear his gift. Good. Symbols matter greatly in court politics." At the temple, they joined a procession of noble women performing devotions to Hathor, goddess of love, music, and motherhood. Nefret assisted Lady Tai by carrying a tray of offering flowers as they approached the inner sanctuary. Just ahead of them in line stood Ankhesenra with several attendants. She turned at their approach, her smile coldly polite. "Lady T, how devoted you are, attending the morning after such festivities." "The goddess deserves our gratitude regardless of mortal celebrations," Lady Tia replied evenly. Ankhesenra's gaze drifted to Nefret, lingering on the golden bracelet. "Such a fine gift our pharaoh bestowed upon your attendant. One might almost think she held special significance." "Divine Pharaoh rewards loyal service as he sees fit," Lady Tyre responded, her tone indicating the subject was closed. They proceeded into the inner sanctuary, where a priestess waited to accept their offerings. The air was heavy with incense, the painted walls depicting Hathor in her various aspects, as celestial cow, as beautiful woman with cow's ears, as mistress of turquoise. As Nefret knelt to arrange Lady Ty's lotus blossoms before the shrine, the tray tilted unexpectedly, whether from her own nervous tension or a subtle bump from one of Ankhesenra's attendants, she couldn't tell. Flowers slid to the stone floor, and as she lunged to catch them, her pendant, which she had worn again after the festival, slipped from beneath her dress. The golden scarab dangled visibly as she gathered the scattered blossoms. When she straightened, she found Ankhesenra staring at the amulet, her expression one of shocked recognition. "That pendant," Ankhesenra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get it?" Nefret hurriedly tucked the amulet back beneath her dress, but the damage was done. "It was my mother's, my lady." "Was it indeed?" Ankhesenra's eyes narrowed. "How interesting. I once saw its twin in a royal treasury inventory from my father's early years as vizier. A matching pair, it was said, commissioned by the previous pharaoh for his son and his intended bride. Lady Tai stepped forward, placing herself slightly between the two younger women. Perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere. The sanctuary is no place for historical debates. This is no mere debate, Ankhesenra replied, her voice hardening. That pendant belonged to Meritaten, daughter of the noble house of Ai, who died in a bandit attack 15 years ago. Yet here it hangs around the neck of a supposed distant relation from the Delta. Several nearby worshippers turned at the rising tension, their curious eyes taking in the confrontation. You overstep, Lady Ankhesenra, Lady Tai warned. Whatever theories you may entertain about my attendant's jewelry, this is neither the time nor place to air them. But Ankhesenra was beyond caution now, her face flushed with the certainty of discovery. I knew there was something familiar about her features. The eyes, the set of the jaw, she is the very image of Meritaten. Who exactly are you, Nefret of the Delta? Or should I call you by another name entirely? The sanctuary had fallen silent, all pretense of devotions abandoned as nobles and priestesses alike watched the drama unfold. Nefret felt her carefully constructed world tilting dangerously beneath her feet. One wrong word now could bring everything crashing down. My lady, she began, addressing Ankhesenra with forced calm, I cannot speak to these historical matters. You are merely a fraud, Ankhesenra cut in. A deception placed deliberately in the pharaoh's path. Does my betrothed know of your charade? Or is he too deceived by whatever game you play? Enough! Lady Tie's command cracked through the sanctuary like a whip. You forget yourself, Lady Ankhesenra. Whatever questions you wish to raise can be addressed through proper channels, not in a public temple before the shrine of Hathor herself. The priestess who had been accepting offerings stepped forward, her expression severe. The goddess demands harmony in her presence. Please take your dispute elsewhere, noble ladies. Chastened by the priestess's intervention but far from retreating, Ankhesenra gathered her dignity around her like a cloak. By all means, but be assured this matter will not rest here. My father, the vizier, will be most interested to learn what I have discovered today. With a final poisonous glance at Nefret, she swept from the sanctuary, her attendants hurrying in her wake. We must reach the pharaoh before she speaks to her father, Lady Tai declared, as their litter hurried back to the palace. Her normally composed face was tight with concern. Once Nachtmin hears of this, your safety cannot be guaranteed, even within the palace walls. Nefret clutched her pendant, now visible above her dress. There seemed little point in hiding it after Ankhesenra's public accusation. She recognized it immediately and saw my mother in my face. The resemblance is indeed striking to those who knew Meritaten well, Lady Tai admitted. I suspected your heritage the moment Imhotep introduced you, though I said nothing until the pharaoh confided in me. The palace courtyard bustled with activity when they arrived, servants carrying supplies, officials coming and going with papyrus scrolls, guards standing at attention beside every entrance. Lady Tai led Nefret directly toward the pharaoh's audience chamber, moving with surprising speed for her age. Divine Pharaoh is in council with provincial governors, a guard informed them at the entrance. He cannot be disturbed. This is a matter of urgent importance, Lady Tai insisted. Tell him his aunt requires immediate audience on a matter concerning Lady Ankhesenra. The mention of the pharaoh's betrothed succeeded where Lady Tai's status alone might have failed. The guard disappeared into the chamber, returning moments later with a nod. Divine One will see you briefly between petitions. Enter and wait by the eastern alcove. Inside the vast audience chamber, Akhenemon sat upon his ceremonial throne, surrounded by officials and scribes. Before him stood a delegation of provincial governors, presenting reports on the annual harvest. Lady T guided Nefret to the indicated alcove, partially screened from the main proceedings by painted columns. They waited in tense silence as the pharaoh completed business with the governors. Finally, he rose, indicating a brief recess before the next petitioners. With measured steps that betrayed nothing of urgency, he made his way to the alcove where they waited. Aunt, he greeted Lady Tai, then nodded to Nefret, his eyes questioning. What matter brings you here with such haste? Ankhesenra has discovered Nefret's pendant, Lady Tai replied without preamble. At the temple of Hathor this morning. She recognized it as Meritaten's and noted the resemblance between them. She intends to inform her father. Akhenemon's expression darkened. This complicates matters. Nachtmin will move to protect himself if he was indeed behind the original plot. What would you have me do, Divine One? Nefret asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Should I leave the palace? Return to anonymity somewhere far from Thebes. No, he replied firmly. Flight would only confirm their suspicions without providing safety. Nachtmin's reach extends throughout Egypt. If he believes you threaten his family's position, distance alone won't protect you. Then what course remains? Lady Tia pressed. The girl cannot continue as my attendant with Ankhesenra, openly challenging her identity. Achenemon was silent for a moment, his gaze traveling from his aunt to Nefret, lingering on the golden scarab pendant now visible at her throat. Perhaps, he said finally, it is time to change our approach. Not concealment, but revelation. Not retreat, but advance. What do you mean, Divine One? Nefret asked. If Ankhesenra means to make this public, we shall beat her to it. On our terms, not hers. His eyes held a determined gleam. Imhotep's investigation has uncovered enough evidence to justify formal proceedings. With Ankhesenra's discovery, we no longer have the luxury of working in shadow. Lady Tai's eyes widened. You would announce Nefret's identity before the court, before you have absolute proof of Nachtmin's involvement. Not her full identity, not yet, but enough to place her under official protection while we complete our investigation. He turned to Nefret. Are you prepared for such a step? Once taken, there can be no return to your former life. Nefret thought of her mother's warnings, the years of hiding, the constant fear of discovery. Then she thought of Achenemon's determination to uncover the truth, to bring justice for a wrong committed 15 years ago. I am prepared, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. My mother lived in fear her entire life after the attack. I would not dishonor her memory by showing less courage when confronted with the same enemy. Pride flickered in Achenemon's eyes. You are truly your mother's daughter. He turned back to Lady Tai. Return to your quarters and remain there with Nefret. Permit no visitors except myself or Imhotep. I will send guards I personally trust. What will you do? Lady Taya asked. First, I will speak with Imhotep. Then I will summon the royal council, including Nachtmin. Before he can act on his daughter's information, he will face the pharaoh's questions. As Achenemon prepared to return to his official duties, his gaze met Nefret's one final time. Beyond the political calculations, beyond the looming confrontation with powerful enemies, something deeper passed between them in that moment, a connection that transcended the conspiracy that had brought them together. In his eyes, Nefret saw not just a pharaoh seeking justice, but a man who had once loved her mother, who perhaps saw in Nefret herself something worth protecting for reasons beyond dynastic politics. And in that unguarded moment, she realized her own feelings had grown far beyond gratitude or duty. Lady Tai, ever observant, noticed the exchange and laid a gentle hand on Nefret's arm. Come, she said softly. The pharaoh must prepare, and we must be ready for whatever comes next. Celestine Mahamkawisen from the window of Lady T's quarters, Nefret watched the palace courtyards below as the afternoon progressed. Royal messengers hurried to and fro, while groups of nobles gathered in small clusters, heads bent in urgent conversation. Something significant was happening, the ripples of Ankhesenra's discovery spreading outward like circles in a pond. They've called an emergency session of the Royal Council, Lady Tai observed, joining her at the window. See how the officials hurry toward the Chamber of Pillars? That is where such meetings are held. Will Nachtmin be there? Nefret asked. Undoubtedly. As vizier, his presence is required at all council sessions. He cannot refuse without directly defying Pharaoh's command. 4 armed guards now stood outside their chambers, elite soldiers wearing the Pharaoh's personal insignia rather than standard palace guards. Their presence was both reassuring and alarming. Protection, yes, but also confirmation that the danger was real. As the shadows lengthened across the courtyard, a tense silence fell over Lady Tai's quarters. Servants brought food that neither woman touched. The waiting seemed interminable, each passing moment stretching Nefret's nerves tighter. Finally, just as the evening lamps were being lit, they heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Imhotep, his face grave but his eyes alight with carefully controlled triumph. The council has adjourned, he announced. Divine Pharaoh requests your presence in the Chamber of Pillars, Nefret. Alone. Lady Taya frowned. Is that wise? Sending her unaccompanied. The guards will escort her, Imhotep assured the older woman. And what transpired in council has altered the situation considerably. What happened? Nefret asked, heart pounding. Did Lady Ankhesenra speak against me? Did the vizier? All will be explained by Divine Pharaoh himself. Imhotep replied. "But I can tell you this much. Nachtmin no longer poses the threat we feared." With those cryptic words, the high priest gestured for Nefret to follow him. The 4 guards fell into formation around them as they made their way through the palace corridors, now quieter as evening approached. The Chamber of Pillars lived up to its name, an enormous hall supported by massive columns carved to resemble bundled papyrus stalks, their capitals spreading open like the plant itself. Oil lamps in golden holders cast dramatic shadows across the painted hieroglyphs that covered every surface. The chamber was empty, save for Achenemon, who stood near the central dais where the council would have sat. He had removed his ceremonial crown, but still wore the broad pectoral collar of his office, the gold and lapis lazuli gleaming in the lamplight. He turned as they entered, dismissing Imhotep and the guards with a gesture. When the heavy cedar doors closed behind them, Nefret found herself alone with the pharaoh for the first time since their meeting in the garden at dawn. "You summoned me, Divine One," she said, performing the formal court bow Lady Tia had taught her. "Please, no formalities between us now," Achenemon replied, his voice weary but carrying an undertone of satisfaction. "We have passed beyond such things today." He guided her to a stone bench beside one of the massive pillars. In the intimate lamplight, away from the formality of court and the watchful eyes of nobles, he seemed more approachable, still a pharaoh, but also a man bearing the weight of difficult decisions. "What happened in the council?" Nefret asked, unable to contain her anxiety any longer. "Nachtmin arrived expecting to control the proceedings as he always has," Achenemon began. "Instead, he found himself facing evidence we had gathered about the attack on your mother's caravan. The guard Amenemhat was brought to testify, and then," a smile touched the corners of his mouth, "the most unexpected ally imaginable came forward." "An ally? Who?" "Ankhesenra herself." Nefret's shock must have shown clearly on her face, for Achenemon's smile widened. "It seems your confrontation at the temple affected her more deeply than we realized," he explained. "While she certainly intended to inform her father about your pendant, she did so with questions of her own, questions about his involvement in events 15 years ago. His response apparently confirmed her worst suspicions." "I don't understand," Nefret said, bewildered. "She seemed so hostile, so certain I represented some threat. To her position as my betrothed, yes, but not to Egypt itself." Achenemon's expression grew serious. "Ankhesenra may be ambitious, but she is not without principles." When she realized her father had likely ordered the death of an innocent woman to secure her position, something within her rebelled. She turned against her own father? Nefret could scarcely believe it. She revealed damning evidence, a sealed document she had discovered years ago in her father's private records, written orders for the caravan's route change, bearing her father's personal seal. She had not understood its significance until today, when she recognized your pendant and made the connection to Meritaten. The revelation left Nefret speechless. Her lifelong enemy, the daughter of the man who had ordered her mother's death, had provided the final evidence needed for justice. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "To Nachtmin, to Ankhesenra, to me?" Achenemon's gaze held hers, and in that moment, the last barriers of formality between them seemed to dissolve entirely. What remained was raw truth, a connection forged through shared loss, rekindled hope, and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. "Now," he said softly, "everything changes. Nachtmin has been placed under house arrest," Achenemon explained as they walked along the palace's eastern colonnade. "His estates are being searched for further evidence," his closest associates questioned. "And Ankhesenra?" Nefret asked, still struggling to comprehend the woman's unexpected role in her father's downfall. "She remains in her quarters, under guard, for her protection as much as anything else. Nachtmin has powerful allies who might seek retribution for her betrayal." 3 days had passed since the dramatic council meeting, 3 days in which Nefret's status had shifted from concealed noble daughter to protected witness in a significant political investigation. "The court buzzes with rumors," she noted. "Lady Tai says some believe I'm an imposter, others that I am truly Meritaten herself, somehow returned from the dead." Achenemon smiled faintly. "Let them speculate. For now, your exact identity remains officially unconfirmed." "How long will this investigation continue?" she asked. "How long before I may speak openly about who I am?" "Imhotep believes we are close to unraveling the full conspiracy," Achenemon replied. "Nachtmin did not act alone. Other nobles supported his plan. We must identify all involved before making public declarations." There is another matter we must discuss, Akhenaton said after a moment's silence. One I have postponed addressing until now. What matter, Divine One? Please, when we are alone, call me by my name, he requested softly. The intimacy of the request warmed her unexpectedly. What matter, Akhenaton? The future, your future, specifically. He turned to face her fully. When this investigation concludes, when justice has been served for your mother, what path would you choose? Would you claim your rightful place at court? Return to a simpler life? Or, he hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Or, she prompted gently, or would you consider a different role entirely, one that would honor your heritage while creating a new future for both of us? Before Nefret could process his meaning, hurried footsteps interrupted them. They turned to see Imhotep approaching, his expression urgent. Divine One, Nachtmin has escaped house arrest. Akhenaton's face hardened instantly. How is this possible? Betrayed from within, the captain of his household guard orchestrated the escape. They fled by boat, heading north toward the delta. Alert the river garrisons. Send messengers to all northern settlements. Akhenaton's commands came rapidly. And double the guard on Lady Ankhesenra. Already done, Imhotep assured him. But there is more. Nachtmin's private secretary revealed before dying that his master maintained a secret network of loyal supporters throughout the nobility, some in positions very close to your person. We cannot trust the regular palace guard, Akhenaton decided. Nefret must be moved to a more secure location until Nachtmin is recaptured. The temple of Amun-Ra, Imhotep suggested. The inner sanctum is accessible only to the highest priests. Akhenaton nodded. Make the arrangements immediately. He turned to Nefret, his expression grave. Nachtmin in desperation is far more dangerous than Nachtmin in power. He has nothing left to lose. I understand, she replied, though her heart sank at the prospect of further isolation. I would accompany you myself, Akhenaton continued, but I must coordinate the search. Of course, Nefret agreed. Your duty is to Egypt first. Something softened in his expression. My duty is to justice. For Egypt, yes, but also for those He stopped, glancing at Imhotep. We will continue our conversation when this crisis has passed. The matter I raised is not forgotten, merely postponed. As Nefret prepared to depart, she found herself dwelling on Akhenaton's unfinished sentence. What had he been about to say? Or something more personal still? 7 days passed in the secluded temple quarters. 7 days of pacing the small garden, reading scrolls Imhotep provided, and waiting for news that never seemed to come. The handmaiden assigned to Nefret was pleasant, but spoke little, clearly instructed to maintain discretion. On the 8th morning, Nefret woke to find Imhotep himself waiting in the main chamber, his expression grave. Has Nachtmin been captured? She asked immediately. No, he has gone to ground like a desert fox, but there have been developments. What kind of developments? Imhotep hesitated. Nachtmin has sent a message to the royal council, a threat disguised as a negotiation. What does he want? To return to his position as vizier, with all charges dismissed. In exchange, he offers evidence implicating others in the conspiracy against your mother. Imhotep's eyes darkened, and he demands that all questions about Meritaten's daughter be permanently abandoned. Nefret felt a chill. He knows who I am. He suspects, certainly. His message referenced the garden girl who wears a royal pendant and suggested that your continued presence threatened Egypt's stability. How did the pharaoh respond? With appropriate royal contempt. No criminal dictates terms to the living Horus. Imhotep sighed heavily, but Nachtmin anticipated this. He included a warning that if his terms were rejected, certain regrettable consequences would follow. A threat against the pharaoh? Perhaps. Or against you. Imhotep's weathered face showed genuine concern. This is why I've come personally. We are moving you again, to a location not even I will know. Only the pharaoh himself will be aware of your whereabouts. When? Tonight. After sunset prayers, when the temple district is quietest. As Imhotep turned to leave, Nefret called after him. Will I see Akhenaton before I'm moved? There was a conversation left unfinished between us. Something like sympathy flickered in the high priest's eyes. The pharaoh leads the search for Nachtmin personally. He has not returned to Thebes since the escape. Another disappointment. Another postponement. Nefret nodded her understanding, though her heart sank further. Be ready at sunset, Imhotep instructed. Bring nothing that might identify you. You will travel disguised as a temple acolyte. Sunset came with unexpected developments. Instead of the quiet departure Imhotep had planned, Nefret found herself hurriedly escorted through back passages of the temple by guards moving with urgent purpose. "What's happening?" she asked the lead guard. "Change of plans, my lady. We must move immediately." They emerged into a small courtyard where a covered litter waited. As Nefret was quickly ushered inside, she glimpsed armed men positioning themselves along the temple roof. "Has there been an attack?" she pressed as the litter-bearers lifted her conveyance. "Nachtmin's men were spotted in the city," came the terse reply. "Now please remain silent until we reach safety." The journey through Thebes was tense and disorienting. Through the litter's curtains, Nefret caught glimpses of ordinary evening life, merchants closing shops, families returning home, temple processions winding through streets. None seemed aware of the danger Imhotep feared. After what seemed hours of twisting progress through the city, the litter finally stopped. When the curtain pulled back, Nefret was surprised to find herself at a modest riverside villa rather than another temple or palace building. "Quickly inside," urged a hooded figure who had appeared beside the litter. Only when they were safely within the villa's walls did the figure lower his hood, revealing the face of Achenemon himself. "Forgive the abrupt evacuation," he said, dismissing the guards with a gesture. Nachtmin's threat materialized faster than anticipated. "You returned to Thebes," Nefret observed, unable to hide her relief at seeing him. "When Imhotep's message reached me about the threat, I knew I couldn't entrust your safety to anyone else." He led her deeper into the villa, which was sparsely furnished but clean. "This property belongs to no one connected to the court. It was my mother's childhood home before she married my father. Few remember its existence. How long must I remain hidden here? Not long, I hope. We've traced Nachtmin to a Delta stronghold. My forces surround it now, awaiting my return to lead the final confrontation." Nefret studied his face, noting new lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. "You should rest before returning. You look exhausted." A smile briefly softened his features. "There will be time for rest when Nachtmin faces justice." His expression grew serious again. "But before I leave, we must finish our interrupted conversation from the colonnade." Nefret's heart quickened. "About my future?" "Yes." Achenemon took a deep breath, seeming almost nervous, an expression she had never expected from the confident ruler. "What I began to ask was whether you might consider a future not just at court, but at its very center, at my side." "At your side," she echoed, scarcely believing his implication. "As great royal wife." His eyes held hers steadily now. "I know this seems sudden, perhaps even calculated given your heritage, but my feelings—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I admit they began with memories of your mother, with the bond we shared as children. But what I feel for you, Nefret, has grown into something entirely its own." Before she could respond, a thunderous crash shook the villa. Shouts erupted outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of weapons clashing. "We've been found," Achenemon said grimly, drawing a ceremonial dagger from his belt. "Stay behind me." The door burst open to reveal one of their guards, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "Divine One, Nachtmin's men, they followed the litter. We're surrounded." "There's a passage beneath the villa," Achenemon said, pulling aside a woven mat to reveal a trapdoor. "My mother showed it to me as a child. It leads to the river." The wounded guard took position at the door. "I'll hold them back, Divine One. Get to safety." Achenemon hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Your sacrifice will be honored in this life and the next." Below the trapdoor, narrow stone steps descended into darkness. Achenemon grabbed a small oil lamp, lighting their way as they hurried down. Behind them, they heard the sounds of fighting intensify. "The passage hasn't been used in decades," Achenemon warned as they reached the bottom. "Stay close." The tunnel was low and cramped, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. Cobwebs brushed their faces, and the air grew increasingly damp. Above them, muffled shouts and the crash of breaking furniture marked their pursuers' progress. "They'll find the trapdoor soon," Nefret whispered. "By then, we'll be gone." Achenemon pushed against what appeared to be a solid stone wall, revealing a cleverly disguised exit. "My mother's family were merchants before they joined the nobility. This passage allowed them to move goods directly from trading ships without paying city taxes." They emerged into a small cave at the riverbank, concealed from view by thick reeds. The Nile flowed dark and silent before them, starlight dancing on its surface. "Now what?" Nefret asked, brushing dust from her garments. "Now we wait," Achenemon replied, scanning the river. I arranged a contingency signal with the captain of my guard. If we didn't return by midnight, he was to send a boat past this spot every half hour. They settled among the reeds, listening intently for pursuit. The night air felt cool after the stuffy tunnel, carrying the familiar scents of river water and blooming lotus. "About what you said before we were interrupted," Nefret began hesitantly. "Your proposal. This is hardly the romantic setting I'd envisioned for discussing our future," Akenemon said with a rueful smile. "Perhaps we should wait for more appropriate circumstances." "We may not get another chance," she countered. "If something happens tonight," he turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Nothing will happen. I will not lose you as I lost your mother. Not to Nachtmin, not to anyone. It's not just Nachtmin we face," Nefret pointed out. "Even if he's captured, even if you truly wish me as your wife, there will be resistance from the court. A garden tender elevated to great royal wife, regardless of her heritage, many will consider it inappropriate." "Let them," Akenemon said firmly. "I am Pharaoh. My will is Egypt's law. Is that how you wish to begin our union? Forcing your nobles to accept what many will see as a political liability?" His expression softened. "You speak wisdom beyond your years. What would you suggest?" Before Nefret could respond, the soft splash of oars reached them. A small boat appeared around the river bend, moving slowly and without lights. "That should be our rescue," Akenemon whispered, rising to a crouch. "But we must be cautious." He removed his royal signet ring and held it where moonlight would catch its distinctive gold and lapis lazuli design. The boat immediately altered course toward their hiding place. As it drew nearer, Nefret could make out two figures, one steering, one watching the shoreline. The vessel nudged silently into the reeds, and a familiar voice called softly, "Divine One, Ipuer?" Akenemon responded, recognizing his captain of the guard. "Praise Amun-Ra," the captain replied with evident relief. "We feared the worst when the signal came that the villa had been compromised." They waded quickly to the boat and climbed aboard. As they pushed back into the river's current, shouts erupted from the villa shoreline. Their pursuers had finally discovered the tunnel. "Where to, Divine One?" Ipuer asked, already steering them downstream. "The Temple of Hathor at Dendera," Akenemon decided. "It's far enough from Thebes to give us breathing room, yet close enough to maintain communication with Imhotep. And unexpected," Ipuer added with approval. "Nachtmin would anticipate a return to the palace, or perhaps a military garrison." As they slipped downriver under cover of darkness, Nefret found herself wondering at the strange turns her life had taken. From garden tender to noble lady's attendant to fugitive fleeing with the pharaoh himself, all in the space of a few weeks. And now a proposal of marriage hung between them, interrupted by danger but not forgotten. She studied Akenemon's profile as he conferred quietly with Ipuer about their route. This was the man her mother had been promised to long ago, the man who now offered Nefret a future she could never have imagined. Did she love him? The question had been buried beneath practical concerns of safety and survival, yet in the forced intimacy of their flight, she could no longer avoid examining her feelings. There was admiration, certainly, for his determination to see justice done, his courage in facing Nachtmin's threats, his willingness to risk his own safety for hers. There was gratitude for his protection and his commitment to uncovering the truth about her mother. But beyond these there was something else growing, something that warmed her when their eyes met, that made her heart race when he spoke her name, that filled her with a sense of rightness when they were together. Was this love, or merely the natural response to dramatic circumstances? "You're deep in thought," Akenemon observed, returning to sit beside her as Ipuer took full control of the boat. "I was considering your proposal," she admitted quietly, "and how best to proceed if we survive this pursuit." "When we survive it," he corrected gently. "And how have your considerations developed?" Nefret chose her words carefully. "I believe we need time. Time for your court to learn my true identity, to accept me as Meritaten's daughter rather than a garden tender. Time for the nobles to see me as worthy through my own merits, not merely through heritage or your favor. And time for your own feelings to become clear," he added perceptively. "Yes," she acknowledged, "these past weeks have been extraordinary. I would know that what grows between us can flourish in calmer times as well." He nodded slowly. "A wise approach. What do you propose?" "A formal acknowledgement of my identity once Nachtmin is captured. A proper period of mourning for my mother, now that her true fate can be revealed. Then, if your feelings remain unchanged, A courtship conducted openly, according to tradition. You would have me woo you like a lovesick youth? Achenemon asked, amusement lighting his eyes. I would have you honor the customs your people expect, Nefret replied with a small smile. And yes, perhaps a bit of wooing wouldn't be amiss. I am not yet convinced that your interest stems from more than responsibility to my mother's memory. The teasing note in her voice softened the potential sting of her words. Achenemon laughed softly, a sound of genuine warmth that seemed to lighten the danger surrounding them. Then consider the wooing begun, daughter of Meritaten, he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. Though I warn you, pharaohs are not accustomed to prolonged courtships. My patience has limits. The temple of Hathor at Dendera rose like a golden mirage in the morning light as their boat approached the landing. After a night of cautious river travel, they had reached the sacred site dedicated to the goddess of love and motherhood. The high priestess is expecting us, Ipwa reported. Imhotep sent a messenger bird ahead. Achenemon nodded, helping Nefret from the boat. Meritaten served here briefly as a young woman. The temple has special significance. My mother never mentioned that, Nefret replied, surprised. It was a brief period before our betrothal was formalized. Her father wished her to understand the goddess she would serve as great royal wife. Achenemon's expression softened with memory. I visited once during that time. She showed me the sacred lake where priestesses performed dawn rituals. They were greeted at the temple entrance by an elderly woman wearing the ceremonial headdress of Hathor's high priestess. She bowed deeply to Achenemon. Divine One, our temple is honored by your presence. Chambers have been prepared as requested. Thank you, Nebet Hathor. May I present Nefret, daughter of... I know who she is, the priestess interrupted gently, her keen eyes examining Nefret's face. The daughter has her mother's eyes. Meritaten would be proud of your strength, child. You knew my mother? Nefret asked. I supervised her temple training. The priestess smiled at some private memory. She had uncommon determination. Now come, you both need rest and fresh clothing. We can speak more later. Their assigned chambers within the temple complex offered welcome privacy after the tense night journey. Nefret gratefully accepted the clean linen dress provided by temple attendants, washing away the dust of their flight in a basin of scented water. A soft knock at her door announced Nebet Hathor's return. The priestess carried a small wooden box, inlaid with mother of pearl. This belonged to your mother during her time here, she explained, placing the box on a low table. I've kept it all these years, somehow knowing it should be preserved. Inside lay a simple papyrus scroll, a small pottery amulet of Hathor, and a dried lotus blossom preserved between linen sheets. Her journal from those months, Nebet Hathor explained, indicating the scroll, and the flower was a gift from a certain young prince who visited once. She pressed it the day she received it. Nefret carefully unrolled the papyrus, recognizing her mother's elegant handwriting describing daily temple routines, reflections on the goddess's mysteries, and, increasingly toward the end, mentions of the young prince Achenemon. I'll leave you to read privately, the priestess said, moving toward the door. But when you're ready, there's something else you should see. Something disturbing we discovered just weeks ago during renovations to the older temple sections. Alone with her mother's possessions, Nefret felt a profound connection across the years. Here was evidence of Meritaten's life before the attack, before her years in hiding, a glimpse of the noble young woman she had been, full of hope for her future with the prince who would become pharaoh. The journal's final entry caught Nefret's attention. The prince leaves tomorrow. Our time together has been brief but meaningful. I believe there is more between us than political alliance, a true connection of spirit that the goddess herself would bless. Yet I cannot shake a feeling of disquiet. Nachtmin's daughter watches me with strange intensity during temple ceremonies. Today she spoke of her admiration for my position, how she herself would make a suitable royal wife should anything happen to me. An odd comment that felt more threat than observation. Nefret reread the passage, chilled by its implications. Even as a young woman, Ankhesenra had coveted her mother's position, had perhaps even then contemplated how to claim it for herself. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Our temple attendant announced that Achenemon requested her presence in the high priestess's quarters. She found him with Nebet Hathor, examining what appeared to be architectural drawings spread across a table. Nefret, he greeted her, his expression troubled. The high priestess has made a discovery that may explain why Nachtmin has pursued you with such determination. We found this chamber during renovations, Nebet Hathor explained, pointing to a section of the drawing. A sealed room forgotten for generations, hidden behind a false wall in the oldest section of the temple. What was inside? Nefret asked. Records, Akhenamun replied grimly. Private temple archives dating back 3 generations, including documents about Nachtmin's family that he believed were destroyed long ago. The high priestess nodded. His grandmother was not of noble birth as family tradition claims. She was a temple dancer, and not even Egyptian but a captured slave from a northern land. Why would this matter now? Nefret wondered. Because according to royal law established by my great-grandfather, no one with foreign blood within 3 generations may serve as vizier, Akhenamun explained. If these records became public, Nachtmin's entire claim to his position would be invalidated. All properties granted to his family through royal favor would be forfeit. And Ankhesenra's marriage prospects as well, Nebuchadnezzar added. No pharaoh could wed a woman with slave blood so recently in her lineage. The implications settled heavily on Nefret. So his determination to eliminate my mother, and now me, stems from more than simple ambition, from desperate preservation of a fraudulent family legacy, Akhenamun confirmed. Your mother likely knew nothing of this when they plotted against her, but now with the investigation into her disappearance reopened, Nachtmin fears all his family's secrets will be exposed. Which explains his extreme measures, Nebuchadnezzar concluded. He fights not merely for position, but for his entire family's standing in Egyptian society. A temple attendant entered with urgent news. Divine One, a messenger has arrived from Thebes. High Priest Imhotep reports that Nachtmin has been cornered in a delta stronghold, but threatens to kill himself rather than face capture. I must return immediately, Akhenamun decided. Dead, his secrets die with him. We need him alive to confess his crimes publicly. You cannot travel openly, Nebuchadnezzar cautioned. His supporters may still watch the river. There are royal barges hidden at multiple points along the Nile for emergencies, Akhenamun replied. Ipwer knows their locations. He turned to Nefret, conflict evident in his expression. You should remain here where it's safe until this is resolved. No, she said firmly. I've spent my entire life in hiding because of Nachtmin's actions. I will see this concluded properly at your side. Something like pride flickered in Akhenamun's eyes. Then we leave within the hour. Nachtmin will face both of us, the pharaoh whose trust he betrayed, and the daughter of the woman he tried to destroy. The royal barge cut through the Nile's waters, soldiers lining its deck. Akhenamun stood in full regalia, double crown upon his head, crook and flail in hand. We approach the stronghold, announced the captain, pointing to a walled compound. Imhotep's forces have it surrounded. Stay aboard, Akhenamun told Nefret. I should be present, she countered. Nachtmin must see his attempts to erase my mother's legacy have failed. At the stronghold, Imhotep reported, he retreated to the inner chambers, demanding to speak with you alone. They found Nachtmin seated on an ornate chair, daggers across his knees. The mighty pharaoh arrives, he said bitterly, with the garden girl who caused my downfall. You caused your own downfall, Akhenamun replied, when you ordered the attack on an innocent woman. Innocent? Nachtmin laughed. Meritata knew our family's secret. She threatened to reveal all. You lie, Nefret interjected. Does she know the full truth, mighty pharaoh? Nachtmin asked. Or have you kept certain details from her? Suddenly, he lunged forward with his daggers. Guards moved instantly, their spears finding their mark. As Nachtmin lay dying, Akhenamun knelt to hear his final words. What did he say? Nefret asked afterward. Nothing of consequence, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. The return journey to Thebes was marked by silence between Nefret and Akhenamun. Though outwardly victorious, something in his demeanor had changed since Nachtmin's final words. At the palace, Imhotep greeted them with news. The council awaits your report, Divine One, and Lady Ankhesenra demands an audience regarding her father's death. Prepare the council chamber, Akhenamun instructed. Nefret will join us. It's time her identity was officially acknowledged. In her chambers, Nefret changed into formal attire provided by Lady Taye. The older woman helped arrange her hair beneath a simple headdress. You seem troubled, child, Lady Taye observed. Nachtmin spoke of truths still hidden from me, Nefret confided. Akhenamun avoided my questions. Lady Taye's expression grew cautious. The past contains many shadows. Some are best left unexplored. The council chamber filled with Egypt's highest officials. Whispers ceased as Akhenamun entered with Nefret at his side. Today justice is served, he announced. Nachtmin's conspiracy against the royal house is ended, and I present to you Nefret, daughter of Meritaten, rightful heir to the house of Ai, returned to her proper place at court. Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber. Then a clear voice cut through the noise. And what of justice for me, divine one, for my family name now stained by my father's actions? Ankesenra stood in the doorway, her face proud, despite her fallen status. You provided evidence against your father, Akenemon acknowledged. For that, you will not share his disgrace. And our betrothal? She challenged, eyes darting to Nefret. Is that also sacrificed to this convenient discovery? The gods have shown a different path, he replied carefully. Ankesenra laughed bitterly. Indeed, how fortunate the gods will align so perfectly with your desires. Ankesenra's challenge hung in the air as nobles exchanged shocked glances. No one had ever spoken so boldly to the pharaoh in open court. You overstep, Lady Ankesenra, Imhotep warned. Do I? Or does the truth finally emerge? She turned to address the council directly. My father's crimes are his own. But this convenient discovery of Meritaten's daughter, just as the pharaoh seeks to end our betrothal, deserves scrutiny. Akenemon's expression hardened. Your accusations border on treason. I merely observe the timing, Ankesenra replied. A garden girl suddenly revealed as noble heir, a pendant conveniently recognized, an investigation that uncovers only what benefits the pharaoh's apparent infatuation. Nefret stepped forward. I am Meritaten's daughter. The pendant was my mother's. These are facts, not convenient discoveries. Perhaps, Ankesenra conceded, but has anyone verified your claim? Has any priest confirmed through proper ritual that you carry noble blood? Or must we accept the pharaoh's word alone? An uncomfortable silence fell as her questions touched on valid concerns. In their haste to pursue Nachtmin, certain traditional verifications had indeed been bypassed. The lady raises legitimate questions, offered an elderly counselor. Not about the pharaoh's honesty, but about proper procedure. Our laws require verification of heritage claims, especially for noble houses as ancient as Ai. Akenemon surveyed the uncertain faces of his council. Very well. To remove all doubt, we shall follow tradition. The priesthood will conduct the heritage ceremony at the temple of Amun-Ra tomorrow. There, Nefret's true bloodline will be confirmed before all. And if it confirms she is not Meritaten's daughter, Ankesenra pressed. Then I will acknowledge the error, Akenemon replied firmly, but it will not. As the council dispersed, Nefret caught Ankesenra's calculating smile. What test awaited her, and why did it seem her opponent welcomed it? What is this heritage ceremony? Nefret asked Lady Tai as they prepared for the temple ritual. Why did Ankesenra seem pleased it was ordered? It's an ancient tradition, rarely performed, Lady Tai explained, arranging Nefret's ceremonial collar. The high priests compare your blood with preserved essence of your claimed ancestors. My mother's blood? How is that possible? When noble children are born, a cloth is dipped in the birthing blood and preserved with sacred oils. The house of A would have stored this in their family shrine. Nefret's heart sank. But I wasn't born in a palace. My mother was in hiding, living as a farmer's wife. There would be no such cloth. Lady Tai's eyes reflected understanding. Now you see Ankesenra's strategy. Without this evidence, the priests cannot confirm your heritage through traditional means. At the temple, crowds gathered to witness the ceremony. Akenemon awaited on the upper steps with Imhotep and the council. Ankesenra stood nearby, triumph already visible in her stance. Present the claimed daughter of Meritaten for verification, Imhotep announced formally. Nefret ascended the steps, head high despite her fears. The ceremonial altar held vessels of sacred water, oils, and an ornate box presumably containing ancestral blood cloths. Where is the birthing cloth of the claimant? The chief priest asked. Akenemon stepped forward. No such cloth exists. Meritaten gave birth while in hiding. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ankesenra smiled openly now. Then, by traditional law, heritage cannot be confirmed, the priest declared solemnly. Wait. All eyes turned to Akenemon. There is another way to verify her identity. He raised his voice to address all present. I declare before gods and mortals that Nefret is Meritaten's daughter, and she is also my daughter, conceived before the caravan attack. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Nefret stared at Akenemon in shock as the implications of his statement washed over her. Her father, the secret Nachtmin had hinted at. The royal birthing cloth from that year, would confirm her royal blood, Achenemon continued. Bring the royal archive. Stunned silence gripped the temple as attendants hurried to fetch the royal archives. Nefret felt as though the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered when Achenemon approached. I discovered the truth only recently, he replied softly. In your mother's final letter, preserved by a loyal servant who escaped the caravan attack, Meritaten was traveling to the summer palace to tell me of her pregnancy before our official marriage. This changes everything, Nefret realized. Not just her identity, but the relationship she had begun to imagine with Achenemon. If she was his daughter, Ankesenra's laughter cut through her thoughts. How convenient. Now she's not just a noble's daughter, but royal offspring. Will your tales never end, Divine One? It is no tale, came a new voice as an elderly man emerged from the crowd. I was the physician who attended Meritaten in hiding. I delivered her child, a daughter with the royal birthmark on her shoulder. Achenemon turned to Nefret. The crescent moon mark, all in my family line bear it. Hesitantly, Nefret lowered her dress at the shoulder, revealing a small crescent-shaped birthmark. The physician nodded in confirmation. The royal archives arrived. Preserved within was a lock of infant hair from Achenemon's birth. The priests performed their comparison ritual with a strand of Nefret's hair. The bloodlines match, the chief priest finally announced. She is of royal birth. Achenemon faced his people. Before you stands my daughter and rightful heir. The gods protected her when enemies sought to destroy both her and her mother. Now, justice is complete. As the crowd knelt in homage to their newly revealed princess, Nefret caught Ankesenra slipping away, her final scheme defeated. The weight of royal destiny settled upon her shoulders, a future far different from anything she had imagined. Days after the revelation, Egypt buzzed with the news of their princess's miraculous return. In the palace archives, Nefret studied the records Imhotep had recovered from Dendera Temple, the proof of Nakhmen's fraudulent heritage. His grandmother was a Hittite captive, she mused, reading the ancient papyrus. Yet he built an empire on claims of pure Egyptian nobility. Many noble houses hide similar secrets, Imhotep noted. His crime was not his lineage, but the murders committed to protect it. The door opened as Achenemon entered. Though now publicly acknowledged as his daughter, Nefret still felt uncertain in his presence. Their relationship fundamentally transformed from what had been developing between them. The council awaits your decision regarding Ankesenra, Achenemon said. As heir, your voice carries weight in this matter. She exposed her father's crimes, yet schemed against me, Nefret replied. What would be just? Mercy might prove wiser than punishment, Imhotep suggested. She has lost everything. Father, status, future crown. Let her keep dignity and a modest estate away from court. Nefret considered this wisdom. I agree. Banish her to her mother's family lands in the north, with resources to live comfortably, but no political authority. Achenemon nodded approval. A balanced judgment. You show the wisdom Egypt will need when you eventually rule. As they left the archives, Nefret realized that while one journey had ended, another much greater one was just beginning. Daughter of Meritaten, yes, but now also crown princess of Egypt, heir to the greatest throne on earth. Ankesenra stood before the royal council one final time, her proud bearing maintained despite her fallen status. Gone were her elaborate jewelry and fine linen gowns, replaced by the simpler garments of a noble in disgrace. The judgment has been decided, Achenemon announced. For your role in exposing your father's crimes, you are spared the full punishment your family name might deserve. You are granted your mother's family estates in the north, with sufficient resources to maintain a dignified life. And in exchange? Ankesenra asked, her voice betraying no emotion. You will depart Thebes immediately and never return to court, Nefret stated, speaking in her new role as crown princess. You will hold no political position, make no marriages without royal approval, and raise no children with claims to noble status. Ankesenra's eyes met Nefret's, hatred momentarily visible before a mask of acceptance fell into place. The crown princess shows unexpected mercy. Not mercy, Nefret corrected. Justice, balanced with wisdom. Something my mother would have valued. As royal guards escorted Ankesenra away, she paused at the chamber doors. You won, garden girl. But remember, fortunes change with the Nile's floods. Today's triumph may become tomorrow's ruin. The threat, however veiled, hung in the air as she departed. Imhotep leaned toward Achenemon. Perhaps we should assign observers near her northern estate. Already arranged, the pharaoh confirmed. Ankhesenra will never threaten Egypt's peace again. Nefret watched her former rival disappear from view, wondering if they had truly seen the last of her ambition, or merely driven it underground like the Nile in flood season, destined to resurface when least expected. The season of Akhet brought the Nile's annual flood, and with it, a symbolic new beginning for Egypt. Akhenaton decreed a grand festival to celebrate both the inundation and the official presentation of his daughter to the kingdom's provincial governors and foreign ambassadors. "These jewels belong to my mother," Akhenaton explained, opening an ornate chest in Nefret's chambers. She would want her granddaughter to wear them today. Nefret lifted a magnificent pectoral of gold and lapis lazuli. "It's beautiful, as are you," Lady Tyre remarked, supervising the preparations. "Every inch, a princess of Egypt." In the 3 months since her revelation as royal heir, Nefret had undergone intensive training in governance, history, and diplomacy. Imhotep taught her religious protocols, while military commanders explained defense strategies. The transition from garden tender to crown princess had been exhausting, but fulfilling. The great hall filled with dignitaries and nobles, their finest regalia creating a sea of color and gleaming metal. At Akhenaton's signal, Nefret entered, wearing the royal diadem and carrying the ceremonial flail that symbolized her authority. "Egypt prospers under divine order," Akhenaton proclaimed as Nefret took her place beside his throne. "The gods returned my daughter from death's shadow. Through her, our dynasty continues, strong as the eternal Nile." As provincial governors approached with tribute, Nefret caught her father's proud smile. Despite the circumstances of her revelation, their bond had strengthened these past months. She had found not just a kingdom, but a family, the belonging her mother had always wished for her. Later, walking in the palace gardens where their journey began, Akhenaton confided, "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, as am I. I carry her memory in everything I do," Nefret replied, touching the pendant that had started it all. "And honor the throne I will someday inherit." Looking toward the setting sun, Akhenaton nodded with satisfaction. His reign was secure, justice had prevailed, and his daughter stood ready to continue his legacy. The gods had indeed blessed Egypt with their divine plan. 1 year after Nefret's discovery in the garden, Egypt celebrated her formal coronation as crown princess. The ceremony represented the culmination of her transformation from hidden daughter to acknowledged heir. The temple of Amun-Ra glowed with 1,000 oil lamps as priests chanted ancient hymns. Nobles and commoners alike lined Thebes' processional way, eager to glimpse the princess who had risen from obscurity to royalty. "Today we honor the divine blood that flows through Princess Nefret," Imhotep declared, presenting her with the royal insignia. "Daughter of Pharaoh, heir to the 2 lands, beloved of the gods." Nefret knelt before her father's throne as he placed the royal uraeus, the sacred cobra symbol of protection and power, upon her brow. "Rise, crown princess of Egypt," Akhenaton commanded. "May you rule wisely when your time comes." The celebration continued into night, with feasting, music, and dance. Nefret moved through the crowds, accepting blessings and tributes from those who had once known her only as a garden tender. "Does it feel strange?" Lady Tyre asked, finding her at a quiet moment. "To be celebrated by those who once barely noticed you?" "Every day brings some new wonder," Nefret admitted, "yet I sometimes miss the peace of tending flowers." "The greatest gardens you'll tend now are the fields of Egypt itself," Lady Tyre observed. "A different kind of nurturing, but no less meaningful." As fireworks illuminated the night sky, a special tribute from distant Persian envoys, Nefret silently thanked her mother for the strength that had brought her to this moment. From the shadows of fear into the light of recognition, her journey had come full circle. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, but tonight she celebrated not just her title, but the truth that had finally emerged from darkness into brilliant, undeniable light. As twilight descended over Thebes, Nefret slipped away from the coronation festivities. She made her way to the eastern gardens where her journey had begun, where a pharaoh had noticed a pendant around a garden tender's neck and set in motion events that would transform both their lives. The reflecting pool shimmered with stars' reflections, its surface occasionally rippled by a gentle evening breeze. Lotus blossoms closed for the night, their sweet scent lingering in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly watered soil. Here, among the plants she once tended with loving care, Nefret found a moment of peace amid the whirlwind her life had become. She knelt beside a cluster of blue lotus, her fingers gently touching the petals, a gardener's instinct that royal training hadn't erased. The familiar texture grounded her, connecting present glory to humble beginnings. "I thought I might find you here," Achenemon said, approaching quietly along the garden path. His ceremonial regalia had been replaced by simpler attire, though the royal presence remained unmistakable. "Even as a princess, you return to your gardens." "They remind me of simpler times," she replied, rising to greet him, "and of Mother. She loved growing things too. She used to say that in nurturing plants, we learn patience, persistence, and the wisdom to know which battles are worth fighting." Wise words from a remarkable woman. Achenemon gazed at the crescent moon rising over the eastern desert, its silver light casting long shadows across the garden. "She would be proud of the woman you've become. Strong, compassionate, wise beyond your years. You carry the best of both of us." "I had good examples to follow," Nefret said softly, thinking of both her parents, the mother who raised her in hiding, teaching her caution and resilience, and the father who welcomed her into a destiny beyond imagining, showing her the power of justice and truth. Together they walked the garden paths, father and daughter, pharaoh and princess, their shadows merging in the moonlight. The pendant that had started their journey hung at Nefret's throat, alongside the royal insignia of her new position, past and present united in a single moment. "The priests say when stars align as they do tonight, the gods dance in celebration," Achenemon observed, pointing to constellations overhead where Osiris, Isis, and Horus formed a perfect triangle. "Perhaps they dance for you." "For all of us," Nefret corrected, her gaze following his upward. "For justice served, truth revealed, and a future secured. For Mother's memory honored at last." As night deepened around them, palace musicians began playing a melody that drifted into the garden, the same tune her mother had hummed while arranging flowers, the song that had connected past to present, lost to restoration. The notes seemed to hang in the air, a bridge between worlds. "I remember that melody," Achenemon said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mary Taton played it on her harp the last evening we spent together, before she departed for what should have been the summer palace. She sang it to me as a lullaby," Nefret replied. "Every night until I was old enough to understand we must hide our true selves from the world." They stood in companionable silence, letting the music wash over them, healing the final wounds of separation and deception. A shooting star streaked across the heavens, Mary Taton's blessing perhaps, from her place among the eternal ones. Under the eternal stars of Egypt, their story found its completion, not an ending, but a continuation of something ancient and enduring. Like the Nile itself, flowing onward through time, carrying the promise of renewal with each passing season and the wisdom of ages in its depths. Wasn't that a journey through ancient Egypt? From garden tender to crown princess, Nefret's transformation reminds us that our true identity often awaits discovery, sometimes hidden in plain sight like her mother's pendant. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel for more emotional historical tales that celebrate the triumph of truth over deception, love over ambition, and destiny over circumstance. What would you have done in Nefret's position? Would you have embraced your royal heritage or preferred the simpler life among the gardens? I'm genuinely curious about which path would call to your soul, the quiet beauty of nature or the grand responsibility of leadership. Don't just keep those thoughts to yourself. Share your reflections in the comments below. Your perspective might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. And speaking of viewers who need something special, have you watched our previous video about star-crossed lovers in medieval Scotland? It's even more heart-wrenching than Nefret's journey, with an ending that will leave you reaching for tissues. Turn on notifications so you never miss our newest uploads. Every week we transport you to another time, another place, where emotions run deep and destinies hang in the balance. Until our next adventure through time, remember that like Nefret, you too might be carrying royal blood in your veins. Not of ancient Egypt perhaps, but the nobility of character that shines through life's greatest challenges.